Hello, friends. Welcome to the third season of Grad School Buddy,
a show that simplifies all your questions about graduate school.
Hosting this podcast are Ebelechukwu, an impact storyteller and development analyst,
and Chukwuebuka, a development finance specialist with a focus on the private sector of emerging markets.
Every 3 weeks, we highlight the voices and stories of people who have gone through the graduate school journey across different walks of life.
We hope our invaluable insights on this show help you make better graduate school decisions.
3, 2, 1.
Hello,
Hi, friends. Chukwuebuka, how are we doing now? Your hello.
Hello is right here.
What is it? Oh, it's hello that we wrote, though. No vex.
No, I know what we wrote.
Hello, friends.
Goodbye.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Grad School Buddy. Today we are with Emeka Nwankwo, the PhD researcher in digital politics at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Manchester Metropolitan University, where he also works as an associate lecturer. His research explores the political economy of communication technologies and infrastructure with a specific focus on developing countries. He also holds a master's degree in digital media from the University of Hull, where his dissertation explored how digital technologies is used to construct an image of the global south for fundraising by development organizations. Pleased to have you here with us, Emeka.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Sure, we are too. Outside your bio, who is Emeka?
So outside of my bio, the most important thing to know is that I'm very sleep-starved. I need a lot of sleep because, with PhD, working, adulting, there's a whole lot of catching up with rest that I need to do. Before I moved to the UK, I lived in Lagos for a couple of years where I worked in the media space. And that is actually what inspired me to do my master's in digital media. I would say fundamentally, outside of my studies, is that I'm just a curious person looking to learn new things, basically.
Great, a curious person.
So I know that when you set off in life, you did not think I want to be a sleep-deprived PhD student. And I know that, yes, your curiosity led you here. But what would you say inspired the choice of specialization in digital politics?
So whilst doing my master's in digital media, we did a course on big data, artificial intelligence, etc. And whilst doing that course, we had to write like an essay. And in that essay, I started looking into things like, how you connect digital media to imperialism and colonialism and all of that. And I really found that area of research very interesting. And then we did another course where we had to look at emerging technologies like blockchain. And I wrote an essay that looked at the political economy of blockchain. And I was arguing that, blockchain technology is very reminiscent of communitarianism, not communism, communitarianism, which is this idea that people live in a community and they share intelligence and they share information. And in doing all of this, it sort of pushed me towards thinking about how technology has the whole political angle. And I was very fascinated by that, and I wanted to learn more about it. So I wrote an article that got published in, I think, Republic Journal. And that article essentially formed the basis of my PhD proposal. And I started shopping it around. When I started shopping it around, I didn't really know there was a thing called digital politics. I didn't even know that my work fit into the area of politics. All I know is that this is an area of digital media that I was interested in. And so when I sent my proposal to, I think it was a professor at my university then at the University of Hull, I sent it to him and he pointed out, that this is where my research would fit in the Department of Politics. And when I did an interview and, they were impressed with everything I was saying and my proposal, So I thought, oh, actually, so my work fits in with politics. This area of research that I want to pursue fits in with politics. So I started sending it off to different politics departments within the UK. I got a few interviews, got a few admissions, and that was it. So as I said earlier, what really got me interested in this area of research was just from doing my master's degree and from like wanting to explore more. But also, if I'm being honest, was also my mom that played a key role in me deciding to do a PhD, because once I was done with my master's, I got a few job interviews and I was going to move back to Lagos and take up a job back to them. My mom was like, "Do you know what, yeah, why don't you just stay and do your PhD all at once and then you can decide what you want to do next from there." And I was like, okay, why don't I just see if I can find a PhD admission while I'm trying to look for a job, and whichever comes first. And eventually I got both. But I decided to stay and do my PhD because I was like, why don't I just do this whole thing? And once I'm 30, and so that was what got me primarily on this path, wanting to conclude my education before I was 30, first of all, but also because I was really interested in this topic of exploring how the intersection of technologies and politics and political economy. And to be honest, it's been a very rewarding experience and I've really enjoyed it so far.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Emeka. And to recap for our listeners, there were three things you said that really kind of motivated you to go on this path towards digital politics. So number one, your master's research, the papers that you wrote, they kind of exposed you to this link or intersectionality between technology and politics. Then you talked about your desire to explore and your curiosity, and also your mom. So shout out to your mom. You would have been in Lagos by now.
I would have been in Lagos traffic.
Yeah, but thank you for sharing.
No, pretty interesting, really. Can you give us a brief rundown of what your PhD program in digital politics is all about?
So my PhD is in digital politics. I studied the political economy of submarine cables in post-colonial countries like Nigeria. When I started my PhD, I had these grand, lofty ideas of all the things I want to do, of all the areas I want to cover. So my research proposal was okay, but it wasn't great, right? And so the first 4 months of my PhD, I sort of like had to refine my research proposal just to make sure that it is more focused, that it is clearer. And after you're done rewriting it, in my school, we used to call it RD1. So it's part of your research development program. So, you meet with somebody and you defend your new research proposal to them. They're just trying to gauge whether you're making any progress. So after that, you move on to a defense of your first year. So you appear before a bunch of examiners from your university and talk to them about what you've done. You write up a report and you also present what you've written in your first year. This is just to help the university see that you're on track, you're making progress, you're hitting all the milestones, and that your work is moving forward in a good direction. So you do that every year, at the end of every year. So I had to do it at the end of my first year, at the end of my second year, and at the end of my third year, which coincidentally happened to be the year that I'd already finished writing my thesis. So what all this does is just for the university to gauge that you're meeting milestones, that your work is progressing, that you're seeing what you're doing. And the good thing about that is that it's also an opportunity for you to talk to other people in the area that is not your supervisor. So in my second year, one of the people that, the panelists that I spoke to defend my work so far was, somebody that studies international political economy. And we had a very extensive conversation. And he told me, oh, you have to read this author. And when you read this author, you have to query this author, you have to look at that. And it was a very important conversation because it turns out that I had thought of that author, but I hadn't engaged with them as fully and as complexly as I need to engage with. Complexly is not a word, I just like saying it. So I had to go back and I just sort of like reread that author and engage with the arguments around their body of work. And it moved my thesis in a slightly different direction. And so what this yearly milestone annual defense thing is that it's just sort of like an opportunity for you to sort of like, receive feedback on your work and have a perspective beyond that of your supervisors. And it could be very helpful for people. And so PhD program is just like each year you have a milestone, you are supposed to be meeting milestones. And so in addition to writing your theses, you also are expected to attend different training programs. Some universities may have a specific amount that you have to go to, et cetera, et cetera. So other than all these university mandated things, the PhD is about 90% just you and your computer and your, whatever spirit is guiding you doing the work. And so for me, the writing of my PhD mostly involved late nights and waking up early and just being at my desk, writing. And because I don't know, from a perspective, it could be good luck or bad luck of starting during a pandemic. Doing my PhD during most of the pandemic, it meant that I spent a lot of time on my own, doing my work alone and not really engaging with a lot of people. So really, PhDs are a very lonely experience, but doing it during the pandemic sort of like made it even a more isolating experience because apart from the milestones and going for a few training programs each year, you're mostly on your own. Yeah, that is how what a PhD program is like.
Oh, wow, quite intense. Out of curiosity, what happens in your third year and you're not meeting the milestones? Does university allow you to just keep on it at your pace and whenever you're ready, or there is a maximum term after which it's bye-bye?
At my university, after your annual review, they could decide that, that you could proceed to the next year or need to do more work before you can proceed to the next year. Or they could decide that, you file you a lower degree. So rather than you moving on to the next year of your PhD, you could decide, you get a master's degree or you get a master of research degree, or, you move out of the program. So you have to prove to the panel reviewing your annual review that your work is good enough, that you're making progress, that you're making new contribution. And obviously, when you start your PhD, part of your PhD proposal, it has to have the timeline of everything you want to do. So we probably feel like from January to August 2024, I'll be doing literature review. And then from then the next 6 months, I'll be doing data collection. Or I'll be doing field work. So really, you just have to have a timeline. And at each annual review panel, you have to show them that you're meeting those timelines. Or even if you're not meeting them, you have to have justifiable reasons as to why you're not doing that. For someone like me that did his PhD during the pandemic, it was a completely different ballgame because I had to keep tweaking things just because of what is happening in the world at the time. You couldn't travel, you couldn't do much. A lot of my engagement had to be online. And I didn't know that going into the PhD because I started my PhD in January and I moved to a completely new city in February. I knew no one in that city, and maybe like 2-3 weeks later, there was a pandemic declared. So I didn't know all of this going into the PhD and that a pandemic would become. So I had to keep refining my timeline and all of that. Unfortunately for me, I was able to finish before the end of the timeline I even had. So that was helpful for me. But for most people, it may not be. So it's always important to be feasible and to have a flexible timeline. Another thing really is just to think of your PhD as any other project, not really just the PhD, really any academic work you're doing. If it's a thesis, for example, if it's an essay, just think about it as a mini project, and you have to design a way to manage it. You have to have like a document saying, okay, this is how many paragraphs I'm going to have in this chapter. This is the word count for it. This is the subheadings for it. Just something, and then the timeline, just so you can be like, at the end of the month or the year or whatever you're using as your target, you know where you are, where you stand. When I started writing my PhD, around this time in 2023, last year, right, I didn't even know that I'd written more than 100,000 words of my thesis. So when I now went back and I was looking at what I used to manage my PhD, because I use Excel and also a Word document. I use a combination of both to manage my PhD. So I had like a table saying, this is all the chapters I want. These are the subheadings. This is the word count for each. And I basically broke it down to the barest minimum. Sort of helped guide me to know where I am. So one day I was like, let me go back and look at what I've done. And I started calculating. I realized, actually, I've written 120,000 words, which is a lot of words, which I didn't even know I'd reached that point. So what I did was I brought all the chapters I'd written, because they were in different documents, and I brought them together in one place. And I was like, oh, wait, I actually have the full PhD. So I had now had to start editing and start checking down all my references to make sure they are correct and doing all of those work to make sure that it formed a huge thesis. And so, if someone is doing their own work, whatever academic work you're doing, if you're writing a thesis, if you're writing your essay, whatever, really, it's always important to have to think of it as a project and then sort of design a way to manage it, because it makes it easy for you. It helps you keep in time. It helps you understand where you're going. And also, it means you also have to have a flexibility. So if you say this is my project management tool, you have to be flexible enough to know that you may wake up tomorrow morning and you're bored and you don't want to do that day. So and you want to do a different chapter, you can move on. Just be flexible. You have it there as a guide, not necessarily as a commandment, as a do or die, really. I don't know if that's the same case for you in your schools.
Ebele, is it the same for you?
And I was going to say that, Chukwuebuka, like this reminds me of what Alan and Lauren said. Alan and Lauren are the people that we interviewed like a few weeks ago. And basically, their notion about writing a PhD is that people should take it as a job. So the way you would look at your job, the way you would set out specific times and specific tasks, basically doing that with your PhD. And what you said resonates very strongly with what they said and what I believe in. My thing in life is just to break activities into piecemeals. So thank you for sharing.
I'm going to say I agree with Ebele. I agree that you have to think about it as a work. A skill I've taken away from my PhD is that in everything I'm doing, work-related, school-related, anything, I break it down to the barest minimum. Maybe I'm running a campaign for work, for example, or maybe I'm about to teach a class, for example. I have like if you have like the notes app on the thing, there's like a checklist thing that you use. And I'll break it down to the barest minimum to make sure that I have everything, because in your head, you may have an idea of where you want to go, but then you forget it. Or when it's time to do it, it becomes a bit stressful. So the thing I've taken away from this PhD is that break everything down to the barest minimum. That we just helps you prepare. And also thinking about this as a work is basically, it's actually a full-time job, So project managing it as much as possible is very useful. I think Ebuka was going to say something related to that too.
No, this is the point where I say you both have said it all. Now, I'm guessing you had a couple of challenges during your PhD journey. What were these challenges and how were you able to overcome them? How did you manage them?
Poverty was the biggest one.
I'm so glad I'm muted because I just started laughing.
How are you surviving?
If the poverty is among how you funded the grad school program, please just tell us the full story.
Okay, so I self-funded my PhD, right? A big problem I have, and which is something I realized very late in life, is that I put too much pressure on myself. So I was very unlucky to start my PhD at a time when there was a lot of funding for international students within the social sciences. I started like a year too early, as my friend would point out. If I started the next year, I would have been much more likely to get funding. But because I was like, you know what? I have to do this before I'm 30, because I was about to turn 26 when I started my PhD in 2020. I should have waited, if I think about it, and there's no rush. But I started the PhD and I self-funded it, and the poverty was povertying. But it did help me that along the line, I figured out how to manage my finance. And again, it's nothing poverty helps you do. It helps you think clearly of, allocate resources. Or let me not really blame poverty, let me just blame the PhD program at this point, because what had happened was that I now started projecting how to manage my finances. So at the beginning of every year and at the beginning of every month, I had to analyze how much do I need to live this year? How much work do I need to do to pay my fees, pay my rent, and be able to live comfortably? So I started projecting on where my money is going to come from. So doing all of that early on meant that I wasn't just moving headfirst into things. I was planning in advance. I needed to pay $15,500 every year for my school fees, because I had a quarterly payment plan. I knew I had to get raise $5,000 every quarter to pay off that fees. So I had to either do work or sell my left kidney, which I'm not using, or something. So basically planning helped me do that. And also living below my means. Moving to Manchester, where I currently live right now, I thought it's not as expensive as London, but it's also not as cheap as Hull, where I was living before then, because Hull is very cheap. Manchester is slightly more expensive. So I thought I had to live in a house share to minimize my expenses. I had to get a job to minimize my expenses. But the thing that I'm very grateful for is that in all this thinking of I need to raise money, I did not fall into that trap of staying in, because when I moved to the UK, for example, for my master's degree, a lot of the people I came with, they ended up doing care jobs, and that was what they were doing throughout their stay. You end up not thinking about your own career because you're focused more on surviving. And I didn't want to fall into that trap of letting survive or wanting to survive sort of drive my goal, and at the expense of building a career and focused more on surviving. And so the thing I did was I started looking for jobs with the university. I started understanding that, okay, so I want to teach after my master's or after my PhD. What do I need to do? I started getting small here and there teaching jobs with the university. And by doing those teaching jobs, I was able to do my fellowship of the Higher Education Association of the UK. So once I got my fellowship, it added some gravitas, to my CV. I just needed something to make sure that if I don't want to spend my PhD chasing money and researching without actually having something solid. So I got teaching experiences. I participated in something called the Brilliant Club. So the Brilliant Club is like a teaching experience for PhD students. So they pay you to go to secondary schools to teach students. You get both teaching experiences, but you also get paid, which was very good for me. And I also got another teaching job with the university, doing academic and study skills, teaching students how to research, how to write, how to do all of those things. Because I was living way below my means, I was able to sort of like pay off my school fees, live and, do my PhD. And it did help. It really helped that I had an interest in my PhD. Like, it was something I was very passionate about. Because now that I'm at the end of my PhD, I'm realizing that as much as I enjoy talking about technology, there's a whole world out there of areas that I'm finding interest. I enjoyed talking about the financing of technologies. I enjoyed that aspect. I enjoy talking about development. I enjoy talking about development finance, development economy. I enjoy talking about political economy and critical theory. And these are all small aspects of my PhD that I see how it applies across the world. And so for me, really, how I was able to manage that poverty aspect, and I'm putting poverty in quotes, was that I was able to plan ahead of time, and I was able to decide that yes, I may be hungry today, but I can't be hungry for the rest of my life. I can't spend all my life hustling and pursuing something. I have to have a goal that I'm working towards, and I have to plan towards it. And I don't want to let today's hunger shape my aspiration for tomorrow, because otherwise, it just becomes like a lifetime of hunger and a lifetime of pursuing jobs that don't really move me towards where I want to be, because I'm just focused more on survival.
I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I'm just going to wait and see if we have time at the end. And yeah. Ebele.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much, Emeka, for sharing. And I think we've also gotten to learn, number one, a whole lot about who you are as a person, about your journey. And I think stories like this are important because I think sometimes when people hear about the PhD program, there are different experiences. There are people who have the full funding experience. There are people who have had to fund themselves. And I feel like there might be someone who might be thinking, hey, am I even crazy for doing this? To what end? What's the end game? What's the goal? So I hope just listening to Emeka talk about how he's not letting the moment define where he's going motivates you to know that you're on the right journey and you're on the right path. I think we also got to learn a lot about other aspects of even your dissertation writing process, including annual review process. And I guess this also gets people in the right frame of mind as they begin to think about what the various components of the PhD program might be. I'm guessing that, during your PhD program, it wasn't only challenges. I'm sure there were some things that were really interesting or really exciting. And specifically, I'm curious to know, in terms of research, what would you say are some of the most exciting research findings or development in your field that you've come across recently? I know specifically, three of us are Africans. Digital transformation in Africa has become a very big topic, a very big agenda. So it might be with regards to what's happening on the continent, or just something that you found in your line of work while doing your project.
So over the course of my PhD program, I was able to get opportunities to work with different bunch of organizations on different things. And in one of them, we were looking at the financing of digital economy. And I've also had experience to work with venture capitals and development finance and all of those areas. And one of the things I keep coming across is this thing about value and volume of funds, for example. So they could say, for example, in 2023, the value of funding in Africa was so amount, and the volume was so amount. And there's a difference. Volume is the number, right? The number of people that got funded, and value is how much they received, right? And so that is something I picked up from doing external, working with people, within Africa, and it's something I learned from talking with people in development finance and in private equity and all of that. And I started asking myself, wait, what does this mean if we apply it in the area of politics? Apply it in the area of digital politics. What do we learn if I examine Africa from that perspective of volume and value? And so what I understood, there's a section, a small section in my thesis, the first chapter, where I talked about how, on the one hand, Africa has a very large market, projected to reach 1 billion people soon. And, for many people, when you look at pitch decks and everything, they always talk about the market is huge, there's opportunity for that. But also the question comes, is it a valuable market? You ask yourself, when we talk about Africa, for example, if everybody in Africa has mobile phones, what is the value of that mobile? Are we generating revenue? What is coming out there? Why is it that a YouTuber in Lagos, even though they have maybe they may have 1 million viewers, they probably might not earn the same as a YouTuber in London that has 1 million viewers? That is because the value of the viewers in Nigeria may not be the same value as the value of viewers in the UK, because the viewers in the UK have more disposable income. They can click on an ad and buy something. As opposed to someone in Lagos that may see an ad, they may click on it, but they may not necessarily buy something. And so in that case, that value is not the same. However, that argument can also be refined to ask yourself look at it from the perspective of data capitalism and from the perspective of a whole next billion user discourse. And that means that it's expected that because Africa is going to reach 1 billion people, and a bunch of the unconnected people that haven't really connected to the internet is from Africa. A lot of tech companies are now focusing on reaching those unconnected 1 billion people, not because those 1 billion people have buying power. It's not because those 1 billion people are, rich. They are not, as we know. Africa is not as rich as Europe, as North America. But the point is that the reason why those 1 billion unconnected people from developing markets, from the developing market of Asia, of Africa, of Latin America, is because they have data that can be mined, that can be used to develop technologies, that can be used to get intelligence, that can be used to get information, really. And so for me, really, when I started thinking about this whole idea of data as valuable, it helps me move away from this large idea that, Nigeria has, 200 million people, and that makes it a very huge market, as opposed to, I don't know, Amsterdam that may have 13 million, and people are saying, Nigeria is big. But the value of Nigeria market in terms of finance, in terms of capital, is not necessarily that huge. And so my thinking changed, understanding that the value of a market may not necessarily be the buying power, but could be from the power of their data. And that means that when I started talking about looking at it from that perspective of value, as data being valuable, as data itself being capital, it now meant that I had to move away from looking at software to start looking at the hardwares of, collecting that intelligence, which was what moved me away from focusing my PhD on software technologies and focusing on hardware and focusing on broadband capacity, which is why I started talking about submarine cables and, submarine cables. I wanted to look at the correlation between information technologies, like the physical information technologies. Well, I don't mean software. I don't mean like Gmail that you have inside your computer. That's the software. I mean like technologies that you can touch. I wanted to see that correlation between technologies you can touch and data traffic and data communication, because I started seeing data as capital. So that was one of the things. That's a very small part of what I learned from my PhD. To start looking at things in terms of volume and value, but also in understanding that volume and value, to also see there's a bit of complication when you're looking at markets like Africa, where there's a huge amount of people, but not a lot of finance. And so rather than looking at them from the perspective of finance, so start looking at them from the perspective of data. I hope that made sense, because it was a very long... When I started talking about my PhD, I tend to have a long, meandering talk about it. So I hope that was helpful.
No, and also don't worry, you're not the only person who's guilty. I think a lot of people who are doing their PhDs love to talk about it, and you're in the right circle. So, not that we're doing PhDs, but we love to listen. So,
yeah,
no worries at all.
When I was doing my mock viva, a huge point of contention was, the panel people telling me, you have to be brief, you're long-winded. I was like, I can't help it, I love my own voice.
Did they tell you that?
They really did. No, yeah, they did. They were telling me to be brief because I was going off on a tangent a lot. They were like, be brief, get to your point as soon as possible.
It's a very interesting analogy you made between volume and value, and how data can be valuable, and kind of how you put all of that into, hey, having understood this, I think it to be more beneficial to my research in the long run, to my continent in the long run, to focus on the hardware aspect of this. And very interesting insights that you have just shared. I guess my final question for you right now, before I hand over to Chukwuebuka, is you have shared with great interest the various areas, specifically in tech and politics, that you're interested in. And also, we have talked a little bit about the digital transformation in Africa. We have talked about data in Africa, the African population, and stuff like that. But I'm very curious as to whether you have made a connection between the current research that you're doing now and how it can be applicable in practical terms to things that are happening on the continent. So, like, how would you say that your research is contributing to broader conversations about digital technology, for instance, and its impact on the society?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. And it's something I really struggled because I felt that my research was very theoretical. For clarity, my research is on digital coloniality. So I'm looking at how whether or the ownership and control of digital infrastructure, if it's a new form of colonialism, if a new form of imperialism. So in my second year, I believe I was having this mild existential crisis that I was writing, my work has no reward impact. So I was having this crisis. And at the time, a mentor of mine told me, "Oh, you can talk with Bosun Tijani." I think Bosun was doing his PhD at the time. And so, and before that, I briefly met Bosun once or twice. And so I emailed Bosun, and graciously, surprisingly, he agreed to have a meeting with me. And I think it was a Saturday that we had like a Zoom call, and we talked extensively. And Bosun was like, "Wait, your work has a real impact. Your work is very important. Keep going." It was very inspiring for me, because he started pointing out that, look, you have to understand things like where this will come in and this implication. But broadly, from my own perspective, but what could have an impact, in a real world impact, would be understanding surveillance capitalism. And so that would mean, the digital economy, right? Let's divide it into three pillars. Let's say hardware. And hardware is things like, your computer, for example, or the submarine cables that brings you broadband, or the middle mile communication technologies like telecom towers, that's a hardware. Then you have softwares like, the Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, etc., right? And then you also have broadband communication, like, again, submarine cables and cell phone towers. And let's say that Google has investment across all three pillars of the economy. So that means that the digital economy is being centralized under the ownership and control of big tech companies. And that means, and these big tech companies are not a lot, and none of them are based in Nigeria, not all of them are based in the West. So the impact is what is happening if they own hardware and they own software and they own broadband. And mind you, Google has an investment in submarine cable, which is Equiano cable. This is like the biggest, has the highest capacity of all cables in Africa, right? And so then you begin to ask yourself, what is the implication of this ownership and control on the digital economy? What does this mean for Nigeria, that our data is being owned by a company that is not in Nigeria? What does it mean? Essentially, Android is the most used software in Nigeria. It's one of the most used software in Nigeria. Facebook, Gmail, all of these things. So you start asking that question of what does it mean in terms of surveillance capitalism, in terms of privacy, in terms of local market development, in terms of intelligence gathering, all of those things. But even more broadly, is beyond surveillance capitalism, you start asking yourself, what does it mean in terms of politics? Does it mean that what leverage does Nigeria have if all your technologies are owned by non-Nigerians, by non-Africans, by people outside your border, people abroad? So all of these questions is part of the things my thesis is looking at, and is sort of asking, is trying to extract, and is trying to understand, basically. And whilst doing that also, because I tend to be much more theoretical, I'm also trying to understand imperialism, understand coloniality. And what I mean by that is, how do I understand coloniality, not as something that has ended, but as something that is continuing? I remember when we started this conversation, Ebele, we talked about how I was telling you about how I meet an Igbo person, and even though both of us can speak Igbo, we're speaking English. And so what I'm trying to understand is, how do you and I, as post-colonial individual, how has colonialism and imperialism of the past, how does it affect us to date? How are we coloniality embodied? There's something called coloniality matrix, which is how colonialism has affected the mind, the body, and the knowledge system. So these are things I'm trying to understand. And sometimes it goes beyond technologies. I often use the perspective of technology to understand all of these things, because I'm interested in coloniality continued beyond technology, etc. Also, to clarify that when Bosun and I had this conversation was a couple years ago, I didn't even know the Home Minister thing was in the equation. This was like around 2021, 2022, if I remember correctly. So it was a while ago.
I'm really excited about the prospects of your project and your research, and I'm excited to see how that turns out in the future. Chukwuebuka, since you have a mouthful of things to type in the chat box, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to jump in. Thank you, Emeka, for that. I mean, it seems like I'm listening to my colleagues and all that, because this is what I spent most of my day doing. But before I digress, how do you stay up to date with the latest research trends in your field? What resources do you find to be helpful
It's quite difficult because my area of research is an emerging one. It's also quite, as you can see, it's very interdisciplinary and very broad. It's mostly all about following people on Twitter, really, and seeing what is being tweeted out there. And, having one or two key people that you follow and people in that area. So for me, it's just making sure that I follow the right people, or even if I don't follow them, just, occasionally going to look at their Google, their Google Scholar website thingy, and seeing what they've published recently, seeing who they're in conversation with, seeing what's happening here and there, but also just knowing that you would never be able to read everything. So that was a trap for me, really, when I started, because I thought that I could, that I was reading and reading and reading. At some point, I got overwhelmed with the amount of things I had to read. So at a point of time, my professor was like, you know what, you've read a lot, time to take a step back and actually write and analyze what you've read. And so I stopped reading for like the last year of my PhD. I was reading, but not as extensively. I was focused more on analyzing the things I've read, because you just get bogged down with reading. The thing is, information not the finish. You will keep reading from now to tomorrow, and you will run out of things to read, and you would, at some point, you get overwhelmed with information. You get overwhelmed with things. As I said a while ago, the social science is produced in an antagonistic environment. So multiple perspectives, multiple things to consider. At some point, you lose your own voice. So it's also important to read the major things in your area and then focus on analyzing those main things. You could read maybe like, say, for example, you could have like 10 people you're reading. And then after you're done reading those 10 people, you'll sit down and analyze them. 10 is actually a lot. I would say 5. And then when you read that 5, you'd find that they would signpost you to other sources. And if you go to those other sources, if you can find them, or if you're interested in reading them, just keep going. But the most important point I'm trying to make is that you have to know at what point to stop, and you can't stay on top of everything. But also, I just remembered now, because I'm trying to talk a lot slower, is that I realized earlier when I was talking really fast. I tend to talk real fast. So these are the things I found out from my mock viva, that I need to be slower in talking, and I have to be less verbose. So this is my opportunity to practice it.
Oh, thank you very much. And do you think, is this a journey you would ask someone to embark on in terms of a PhD in digital politics? If so, what advice would you give to someone considering this path?
100%. I would tell somebody, because there's something really enjoyable about learning. There's something really fulfilling about, seeing the knowledge that have come before you and the possibilities of new things to learn. I get excited at that, right? But I would make sure to tell the person that before you do a PhD, make sure that you're funded. Because there is nothing worse than doing a PhD and you're worried about how you're going to survive tomorrow, what you're going to do tomorrow. It takes not only does it take physical energy, it takes up a lot of mental capacity, and you don't want to be bogged down with that whole thing. So before you do a PhD, make sure that you think clearly about the financing. I didn't really think clearly about the financing, and I thought that if I start my PhD, I could apply for fundings, I could apply for grants, and then they would come. But applying for funding and applying for grant, you have to. Eventually, I had to wait. I spent a lot of energy and a lot of time and a lot of a mental capacity applying for grants and funding it came at the expense of me actually doing my PhD and also actually going out there to work. So I thought, you know what, let me focus on writing my thesis and actually looking for work and building my career rather than spending all this time applying for grants. So I had to do a whole lot of balancing acts to find out what would work well for me. And so while I would encourage anybody to, yes, pursue a PhD, is exciting, is thrilling, is insightful, but you also have to make sure that, that you have the financing in place. That was something I didn't think all the way through. But also you want to make sure that the PhD you're doing serves a greater purpose. You're not just doing it just to have a PhD or just to be called doctor, but you also want to make sure that it feeds into your broader career goal. Right. Personally, I think this applies all the way from master's degree for PhD. So you're not just doing a degree for doing its sake. You're doing it because it feeds into the broader narrative of your life. It feeds into the broader vision you have for yourself. That would help you sort of like walk towards it properly. That would sort of make sure that at the end you feel more fulfilled. So it's important to think clearly about where you're going to or where you want to be. You don't have to have the right answer, but at least you should have a sense of where and what you want, really.
You've shared some really powerful statements in the past few minutes, first of all, from saying you can't read everything, read the most you can, and jump into the research as fast as you can. But then it's really solid advice to tell people to think about funding. I say this all the time, I feel sometimes when you tell people to think about funding, you seem like some sort of bad belly because you've gone to do your master's now and you're telling the rest, think about funding. But think about funding in the sense that even if at the end of the day your funding is not complete, at least be aware of the struggle and the chaos that can come with that. But then most importantly, you talked about thinking about the bigger goal. Like, do not do a PhD or a master's program just for the sake of it. Make sure it kind of aligns with who you are as a person, the bigger picture of what you're looking to do with yourself and your career. And I guess this brings us to our final question for you, which is, what would you say your plans are after you complete your PhD program? And how do you hope to apply your research findings in your future career?
Well, on Friday, after my Viva, I will be outside. I shall be outside.
You saying that made me realize I think we skipped the question, which was about like your emotions. Like it's this is 2 days to your Viva. I'm sure when this is released, it will be many months and you probably won't remember the emotions. So if you can also just tell us what that feeling is like for you right now.
I'm fairly certain there is a 90% possibility that I shall cry. When the first time I printed my PhD, like I printed it as a huge document and I saw the entire thing, I felt a wave of emotion because I was like, oh my, I wrote this. Like, I'm a serious person. Look at me. I'm an adult. I wrote this whole thing. Do you get what I mean? So I imagine that during the whole Viva would unleash a flood of emotion. I don't know how I'm going to feel exactly, but I know it's going to be a very powerful moment because it's sort of, it concludes like something I've spent the last couple of years doing on a road I've been down for a long time. So I think it's going to, I don't know, if you shall see a picture of me on the internet crying, mind your business. What am I going to be doing after? First of all, I will be outside, but also after I'm outside, I have to come back inside and start working towards my goal. So as I mentioned earlier, I do enjoy teaching and I want to mend the classroom, which is one of the reasons why I did my PhD, because I wanted to, stay in academia and teach and all of that. But also I'm trying to not sort of like keep myself just within academia, because I feel like my work has broader impact. And I really do enjoy, working within the area of development, finance and impact investing and gender lens investing and all of those things. So I kind of want to see how my and climate investing, all those, I kind of want to see how my work sort of translates to those areas. I want to see how I'm able to sort of like contribute to institutions working in that area. I want to see how we can use private capital to drive economic growth. And I also want to see how we can re-articulate the fundamental elements of capitalism in order to serve those at the base of the pyramid. So these are the things I want to do after my PhD. But most importantly, because my PhD is huge, I want to write books and I want to start publishing in earnest. So now that my PhD is concluding, I'll spend much of this week barely going outside, just focused on writing. And so while I'm doing the writing, I'm also applying for fellowships and postdocs and teaching and whatever I can find. But for now, my main goal is just focused on like publishing and contributing to knowledge. But on Friday, I shall be outside.
Definitely. I think you deserve to be outside, and we wish we could join you in being outside. I feel like you have shared big, clear goals, and we look forward to seeing your name on book covers outside this interview. And I hope you get to publish your project so that the rest of the world can read it. But also, with regards to your Viva Day being a day of very powerful emotions, I hope you allow yourself feel all the emotions. And I'm a crier too. Chukwuebuka is the Obiak. Well, we have to go in yin yang motion. So feel free to call us to cry with you or to celebrate with you. Ebu, would you like to jump in? Do you have any other thing to add?
Yes, it's been nice chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. So, Emeka, for people who have enjoyed this conversation, can you please tell them where to find you? It could be LinkedIn, it could be Twitter.
So I'm on LinkedIn. Just look me up at Emeka Joseph Nwankwo, or Twitter at Mazi_Emeka. Emeka with an R at the end. That's Mazi_Emeka. I_EMEKAR. Same on Instagram. But yeah, I'm always open to answer whatever question and to offer whatever guidance I can.
Thank you so much, Emeka. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank our listeners for listening to us up to this moment. Remember, if you want to connect with Emeka, you can find him at Emeka J14 on LinkedIn or at Mazi Emeka with an R on Twitter and Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to check out our previous episodes. You can follow us on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at my grad school board. Don't be shy to say hello.
Bye, everybody, and thank you for listening.